Assalamu alaikum. Patrick, you're online? All right, we're good to go. معكم عبدالرحمن مدالله. أنا General Manager for Planning and Design في الSDA هيئة تطوير المنطقة الشرقية. قبل ما أبدأ طبعاً أنا سلمت عليكم، أحب أن أحمد الله على هذه الفرصة وأن نبدأ بالصلاة على النبي. Let me share with you a story. 1 year after graduating from the Bachelor's of Architecture, I studied architecture at IAU, only a few miles away from here. I I attended the UIA World Congress of Architects. It was a big deal then. And the much awaited talk of the event was Zaha Hadid's talk. I enter the hall. Nearly thousands of seats has been reserved. And I get to the front line and sit on the floor, no seats available. And to my right were students from the Dominican Republic, to my left from the Netherlands and Iran. I know because I am friends with some of them today. Zaha Hadid enters onto the stage, traced by glimmering camera flashlights. And then she gets onto the stage and to the podium, and she starts presenting in a monotone, very confident female voice, presenting over a dozen of architectural projects with buzzwords of deconstruction, gray, and order. She leaves, and all the students rush to get her autograph. Hardly anyone could. But I leave from the back door, and on my way to the hotel, I stop by a street, about to cross the road, and a mini car stops right in front of me with the windows open, and there was Zaha Hadid right in the back seat. And Suha Haskan was in the front. I have a flyer in my hand, and I hand it over to her and ask her to sign it, and she does. I was very lucky. As a young architect, you aspire to learn from leaders such as Zaha. And today we are with Bاتريك شوماخر. And I know, Patrick, that there are many young architects, and I feel young today, who aspire and to be inspired by leaders of the architectural practice today. So you went on with Zaha, and you probably know her more than I do. And you've been on a journey with her since the 1980s or so. And I want to get a bit personal and know exactly how you met Zaha and what was this journey like from the beginning until the end. And I hope that you give us the details. So take us through it, please.
Welcome everybody first from London. I'm happy to be here, and I love your little anecdote. I've given so many lectures around the world with Zaha. Being with her, and I know what you're talking about. It's been amazing adulation and warmth she received, and also give back to everybody. And let me tell you that Zaha's birthday is today, and she would have been 70 years today. So I feel very touched and warm to reflect with you and with her fans in the Middle East about her life and how I got to meet her. And I mean, she was, by the way, it's wonderful that we actually have some of success and beautiful works in Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries and cities. She was very proud that her success brought her back to her homeland. I met her first in London. I was actually heard about her and had known about her when I was a young student in Stuttgart in Germany, and she had just won the Hong Kong Peak competition against all the top elite architects of the world at the time, a totally unknown young person, just finished her studies at the AA, and she was a young teacher at the AA, working from home, from a little muse house. So she won this competition. This was published, and she had some beautiful drawings, fantastic drawings, and they landed in Stuttgart and around the world in universities. So she was an insider star already, and I made my way to London and continued my studies. And while I was a student in London, I actually met her because she was giving a lecture at Tate, and this had to do with the MoMA show, which opened later that year in New York, the Deconstructivism show, and it was a wonderful lecture, and immediately it confirmed to me not only is she fantastic talent, but also a very genuine and frank and warm person who I wanted to know. So I made my way, knocked on her door in her studio, and was received. And I was lucky that I became one of the very first employees. She had just opened her office, moving from her home and schoolwork to a kind of studio. She had rented a single room in Clerkenwell, and we are still occupying that space. So it was at a time when we started a lot of competitions, a lot of designs, which didn't lead anywhere, but built the reputation of a talent. And I also was lucky, 1 year after I've started, the first real client came to us. This is Rolf Fehlbaum, the CEO of the global furniture factory Vitra, and we designed a modest but very important for us and for the history of architecture, we might say, so a small building there, which allowed us for the first time to build some of those beautiful geometries, this dynamism of space. So that's the way I met Zaha. I met her initially, just from afar, and then I got close to her through working late hours. I mean, we were working literally every day, nearly until midnight, sometimes all-nighters on weekends. We also then took the flight together to present some of these competitions. And the first decade was just that. Except for Vitra, we had actually only the thrill of creating designs which were applauded by our peers, but there was no yet any real outlet for that. That came later.
Excellent. I did not introduce myself. I wanted to start with our guest today. So I'll tell you a brief history of how I took my journey with architecture. So I mentioned that I'm currently with SDA, with the Sharqia Development Authority, but I know that many of you would connect with the history of a local, and I am a local. I mentioned that I've got my degree in architecture from the University of Dammam, or IAU today. I practiced for a couple of years, about 5 years, and then moved to the States. When I moved to the States, I studied urban design, and that was from the University of Colorado. And then I taught at the Boston Architectural College for about 2 years, and then earned a Master's of Science in Architecture from Syracuse University, and then moved back into Saudi, and actually not too far away from here, Khobar, and founded a local architectural office, Madana, known today as Madana. And I've done quite some research for the past 10 years, and mostly in urban cities, and mostly in the kingdom. So I grew interest in sort of investigating major cities in Saudi, and basically Dammam, Riyadh, and Jeddah. And I observed how our cities sort of grew exponentially and horizontally, and how sort of compare our major cities in the kingdom to other cities globally, and depict what are the similarities with other global cities, and depict what makes them different. cities around the world are tested by the constant changes in urban realities. Migration of people looking for better quality of life and work opportunities. Other challenges of accommodating economic bases and societal demands. So these are constant changes that every city face. And of course, not too far, major cities here in the kingdom. So these challenges put a stress on architects and planners and designers. And I think that architects are not equipped yet, and they are still bounded in their responses against these challenges. And I want to see if Bاتريك agrees with me on that or not. But I know that from the last time I met Bاتريك in Riyadh and Capsark, that they've been rethinking the way architecture should respond to some of these challenges today. And I remember, Bاتريك, that in Riyadh, that you presented sort of a timeline that presented or illustrated how Zaha Hadid adopted different schools of thoughts, moving from deconstruction to blob architecture to more recently parametricism. So I know, and many of the other Radids, I'm sure, would love to know about these schools of thoughts and the more recently adopted one, parametricism. And how do you think these schools of thoughts are sort of an answer to respond to some of these challenges that are faced in our cities?
Well, this is a wonderful question and very important question to reflect on, because the architectural styles are not created in a vacuum. They're not just succeed each other on the basis of their own dynamics only, but they're responses to the societal, technological conditions which also drive changes in the urbanization process. And of course, we need to reflect that the 20th century, from the 1920s to the 1970s, over half a century, was dominated by urbanism based on the ideas of separating functions, of decentralization, of suburbanization, based also, of course, on the car and on a certain way of life. Which was based on mechanical mass production, where you had to a minute division of labor, and you have a stable production, but very little innovative dynamics, because you had to have stable production lines for decades, if you like, to have that mass production paradigm. Now, in the 80s was actually the big transformation decade. Where we also see that modernism changes into postmodernism and deconstructivism. And that coincides with the idea that this moving out to the green fields, to the suburbs, is no longer the ideal situation when we have new technologies which allow us to have more innovation absorbed into the production process through the microelectronic revolution. So we have R&D, marketing, finance coming into the cities, because we can reprogram the assembly lines now. We can now even develop software of service and upload new versions quickly, so the technological systems can absorb much more innovation. And that means we need to come together to do this research, development, innovation, financing, marketing of this. And you have the urban renaissance. So the move out of the city was reversed, and we have a revitalization of the city. And that coincides with deconstructivism, which is about layering the new onto the old, of having mixed cities, where you have the different types of functions. Work cannot coincide with living and entertainment, because it's no longer factory work, which creates pollution, but it is knowledge work, research work. And that's why we have this new urban renaissance. And deconstructivism is an answer to this, because it is about the complex integration of multiple functions of different forms, old and new, and parametricism continues that. So our whole careers were based on making that transformation from a modernist suburbanization to a, let's say, postmodernist, deconstructivist and parametricist intensification of the urban order. And London is a great example of that. You know, London was shrinking for most of the 20th century, and people moved out, and the reversal happened throughout the 80s and 90s, and then became the fastest growing city of the whole of Europe, and still is so. And you can see it in the financial sector. It's the media sector as well in the West End. It is the creative sectors, engineering and architecture, as global expert businesses. And that's what we are catering for. But it's also happening in other cities around the world. And we have also, of course, developing countries, emerging countries, which develop whole new cities. But they want to learn from this new dynamism. They want to have mixed use. They want to have urbanity. They want to have, let's say, a pedestrian life as well. So what we have learned in the European cities, which was mainly city extensions like converting the harbors, which were originally central, for instance, in Hamburg, the Hafenstadt, in London, the Docklands. These were the areas where we could also expand on a larger scale within the historical cities, that these models we developed for these conditions, we could also allow for satellite cities, for larger urban developments for instance, in Istanbul, in Asia, Singapore, we were working on, and a lot of master planning we do in China, but it's a new contemporary idea of mixed use urbanity for the knowledge economy, and no longer the industrial city, which is about spreading out. And that means the architectural repertoire, the style, has to be more adaptive, more malleable, more versatile, more rich and layered, rather than separating out into a neat order. So that's why we have to understand the deeper historical foundations of these new styles.
That's an excellent answer, Patrick. I remember the last time in preparation for this talk, we've had a rehearsal, and you've mentioned something that I thought was quite interesting, that the new future of urban cities and the engagement with cities is going to require us to use new skills and to comprehend and be more adaptive and resilient to or increase our domains of engagement. And I remember you mentioned something about the use of algorithmic zoning and some of these new technologies that could replace what I think is an outdated way of planning mechanisms to control the city. The functionalists for the past 50 years have sort of suggested for us the single-use technique and the separation between one use to another. But I definitely agree with you, and maybe you could reflect on that a bit, that the future is more promising, but we, as architects and urban planners, need to increase our domains.
So that's very important what you're saying. So for instance, the scenario for the 20th century modernist city was a green field, where you could lay out a grid on a flat surface and make a series of repetitive zones. The condition of the 21st century or late 20th century to the 21st century was city densification and extension. So the sites were not greenfield site. The sites might have been a harbor condition. So you have a complex geometry already. You have existing buildings. In Singapore, we had an old military camp. It was a beautiful landscape topography, some existing buildings, a lot of pre-existing streets dissecting and flowing in. So you can't put a grid on that. You don't want to make a flat plane and a rigid grid. You need to work with the topography, with the existing lines. And that means the geometry, the urban geometry, must be malleable, must be organic, And that's where we're coming in with our algorithms, and also the offering of urban blocks must be and can be varied. So that's where we make variation, differentiation, and the whole urban fabric becomes much more lively. And then we're relying on the fact that different architects coming in and translating the various urban blocks in their own way within that context to make it even more lively and varied. But I have always been arguing that we have to watch out. In most cities where you allow everybody to come in with their own style, with their own ideas, very quickly you get an urban agglomeration which lacks any unity, identity, and a memorable urban form. So that's where we have to watch out. And while in the modernist eras we have very monotonous extensions, in the recent decades we have another problem, which is the lack of identity through the, let's say, unrelatedness of a nearly chaotic agglomeration of buildings. I used a phrase which was maybe a little bit controversial. I called it garbage spill urbanization. So we wanted to introduce an urban order and parametric order which responds to conditions, but is also a recognizable urban form, identity, and order. So these are the kind of ideas we've developed, and we're showing that in Singapore, in Istanbul, and some of our Chinese city extensions recently, which are usually for the knowledge economy. But overall, this is a discourse which is relatively underdeveloped. So we still need a lot of our colleagues to help us to take responsibility collectively for the urban development. But if you look at now around the world, one can't believe that actually city planners have shaped that. It's actually the market process shaping that, and we need to learn how to work with the market process to give it a beautiful form.
As you're mentioning that, I think I'm somehow connected to another architectural discourse that we're sort of occupied with in this region. We are somehow occupied with romanticizing the past, and we're somehow trapped in that discourse, especially in architecture. And a group of architects is asking us to revisit the past and somehow grab our identity from that certain era. But I think that just renounces the frustration and the inability, and I don't know if you agree with me on that, the inability to deal with the contemporary urban form today. And I think I would agree with you that it is a collective effort for many architects, and not single unique ones and probably talented ones, in order to actually make an impact in the city. Time is running out, and I want to get to an important topic before we move. Urban planners for years have been occupied also with the efforts of trying to make a balance in a city, to control what is public space and what is private space. And we sort of talked about that a bit today. It is definitely a difficult job to do, to project permanence and stability for a city, and to sort of close the gap on the different societal segments and segments of income in a city. Over the past couple of years, Patrick, you've had a different realization. You have suggested an approach to privatize public space. And I feel like I'm either going to be with you on that or find another job as an urban planner or an urban designer. So I wanted to get your feedback on that approach, and I'm sure you've heard several resisting statements around that. But I give you around 5 minutes to respond.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I mean, of course, there will be the job of urban design, of planning, remains, except that instead of everything being controlled and focused by one political center, it is the different developers, the different urban entrepreneurs who will draw in the talent of planners and urban designers. And so I will talk about planning, private planning, and why I find it probably to be very productive is that if you have a city like Riyadh or even London, literally with thousands of streets and parks and squares, and there is simply not enough capacity, information processing, knowledge, incentives in the group of, let's say, urban state planners to give that the nuance, richness, and activation to fully utilize the potential of these public spaces. And I think if the private initiatives would generate value diversity and would be more agile and flexible to respond to market demands. And I think we see in initiatives that these might not always be for-profit developers. It might also be local initiatives, NGOs, many civil society organizations to run this, but it also could be, of course, for profit. And there are nice examples. In London, there has been enormous increase of public spaces from spaces which were before, closed off harbor spaces, closed off industrial spaces, closed off rail yards. And there's been a lot of all of these projects which were created on a certain scale, which included the spaces in between buildings. You see wonderful public spaces emerging through private hands. For the end user, they wouldn't know. There makes no difference. They just enjoy the facilities, the public spaces, the curation of these. And you have that in Paddington, in even Paternoster Square, in King's Cross, in Canary Wharf. And these are very successful examples where the energy, initiative, and the resources can make public life more beautiful. Because I believe that we need that in-between space needs the same amount of energy, dedication, and intentional for activation, like the interiors of buildings. And I think it's simply maybe an overburdening of a public authority who also then would always have to balance out. And what I find with the politically controlled public spaces, yes, they give you a kind of general standard, but there's a sense of sameness. And there's not the energy of differentiation. It's as if that all bars, clubs, and restaurants and museums were run by the government. I mean, one wouldn't expect the kind of richness and diversity we would all crave for. And I'm often misunderstood that people think I want to exclude now. I want to make these kind of, preserves for the rich. That's not at all the intention here, and that's also not what would happen. If you see initiatives, and this for me is also part of who is going to drive the pedestrianization and activation of street spaces. It's private initiatives. I mean, it's wonderful. And this is not always, this is sometimes, landowner associations or retail associations. I mean, in the West, and there's a lot of civil society bodies which do the initiatives of, for instance, pedestrianizing in the summer Regent Street or activating the whole of the West End. These are what I'm talking about. So I've been misunderstood. The intention is really to generate a public sphere which gives more energy and facility and utilization to these precious resources in our inner cities.
I think still it's a very, very challenging statement. And I know that it's going to be a difficult job for all urban planners or urban designers or any activists within a city to try and move according to that approach. But I see that definitely, and for the past couple of years, 50 years or so, real estate engagement in the economic models has been sort of the threshold for urban development. And it could, your sort of discourse kind of makes sense. We're running out of time. I have a couple of seconds left. What do you think the future of architecture is, Patrick?
Now, what I'm preoccupied with at the moment is so also triggered by the pandemic and by the discovery that we can do so much online, is that the work environment and also the city will change character. We will still come to the city, we'll come to work, but it's more to gather, to debate, conferencing, meetings, and not so much heads down work. So that will have taken more place at home. And I think we will also do more work online. And I think there's a task for architecture to increase the experience in the online communication and interaction. So I'm thinking about some kind of fusion of virtual spaces of interaction with real spaces of interaction, so that the real spaces have extensions and are designed together with the virtual spaces. So I'm thinking about our corporate clients as well as our institutional clients, who are all now opening up virtual communication platforms, that we design them together hand in hand with the urban architecture, so that the same ideas of navigation, the same semiotic understandings, comprehension, and aesthetic values permeate across from the urban into the virtual. And I think that our cities will become more pedestrianized. Visual communication remains incredibly important. So that's my vision, what I'm currently looking for. I don't believe that the pandemic and virtual communication will bring us totally away from the city. It will be a different kind of city, which will be layered with virtual content.
Excellent. I think it is time for us to take the Q&A, but I'm enjoying it, Patrick. I wish they could give us like another 30 minutes.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Abdulrahman, for an interesting talk. We'd like to open some questions for our audience. Okay, ushers, please. Yeah. We have actually 2 questions.
Yeah, hello. My question is how to balance between innovation and local identity, either balance or blend.
Yeah, thank you for this question. I mean, if you look at our projects, Kapsak and also the metro station at the financial district, that we're trying something there. And if you look at our work we developed for the Middle East, it is quite different in character for the work we're doing in Europe and work we're doing in China. So one element of parametrism, what I call parametric regionalism, it also comes through because we want to learn from the vernaculars in terms of ecological approaches, passive systems, learning from also some cultural patterns. So we have courtyard buildings here. We use more solid walls and not just glass buildings. We have shading zones, and we give the overall building. It is something interesting, I think. You can recognize it as an Arabic project, both of these, and you also notice it is a 21st century project. So that's a task which architects have to tease out intuitively through their talent, through their research, through their inspiration. And Zaha was very keen on that. And she, of course, as an Arab, was always looking at, geometry patterns, the calligraphy. We looked at the landscapes. And if you look at what we're doing also in Sharjah, for instance, with the beautiful office building for the waterworks there, we having this kind of dune forms, so embedding in the beautiful landscape. So, and again using materials which fit in. So it's something which there is no. The answer comes through the design exploration and standing back and saying, does it fit in? Is it recognizable? And it is also through the audience, when audience feel at home in these buildings and accept them as part of their city, then we know we've done the right thing. So and I hope that you can see in all our works in this region, including what we've done in Beirut at the American University there, that we are trying very hard, and because it's an emotional need as well. And if you look at what we're doing at the Iraqi Central Bank, again, you will find that it is driven by climatic pressures and a response which also wants to be congenial to some kind of cultural heritage.
Unfortunately,
I would like to answer that, and I'll be very brief. You tried to compare local identity and innovation. And I think this is the discourse that I think we've been trapped in, thinking that the two are two different sides and that they are apart. But I think that innovation is definitely our identity. I'll try to be brief as
Thank
just
you.
That's very nice.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Abdulrahman. We hope to see you again at Tanween. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.